Here we go. Hello and welcome to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, highlighting artists, teachers, authors, and philanthropreneurs who are committed to planetary purpose, or in other words, holistic visions for planet Earth. My name is Julian Guderley, and in today's episode, I'm hosting an interview with Steph Sifandos. Steph is on a truly transformational journey. He's a relational alchemist. Among other major talents, he helps men with a program called Reclaim Your Kingdom, bringing the sacred into everyday, claiming our conscious masculinity. Steph is a voice for the voiceless to assist individuals in actualizing the fullness of their potentiality, to relate consciously to each other with authentic love, be a conscious steward of Earth, and continue to evolve and expand the entirety of his being. This is his humble gift to humanity and to his own self. So with these words and without further ado, welcome to the show, Steph.
Very happy to be here, brother. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Let's jump right in. I know you have quite the story, and I want to get some new and raw diamonds out of your being, So give us a little bit of an insight. How did you make it from adversity to freedom? Because I know there's quite a bit of adversity you had to go through in order to arrive in this free, powerful man you are today.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this conversation yesterday with a dear friend of mine, and we were talking about adversity specifically, and we were talking about what does it mean to move through pain and discomfort and the difficulty that we experience in life, to come through that and be another human being. But literally, physiologically at a cellular level, to be another human being, and also behaviorally and spiritually, emotionally, relationally, how we relate to the world, how we see ourselves and so forth. And we were talking about, she just got back from Germany. And so her and her family her father and her sister actually just went on a little bit of a tour connecting to their roots and connecting to some of their heritage and their culture. And part of her family story, there's a lot of suffering and pain there from her father. She didn't get to experience that because she was born in the US. And we were talking about stories, and we're talking about comparing stories, so to speak. And it's like, we think about, and I even think about my own grandparents, my own grandfather, who was in World War II, and he was fighting for Italy. I'm half Italian, half Greek. And then Mussolini was overthrown, or rather he died. And all of a sudden, Italy is no longer an ally to Germany, but rather their enemies. And so he was captured. He was in a war camp. He was there for about 3 years. Atrocities occurred there as well. He survived that, came out of that. He moved to Australia. Spent 5 years on his own. I'm giving you a very short version of this, right? Spent 5 years on his own, trying to accumulate as much money as he could to bring my mother and my grandmother over from Italy because they were so poor. There were times where he just couldn't eat for years and years. And he couldn't, of course he was eating during the years, but there were many times where he just couldn't eat. He had to save money. And I think about some of those stories, and I think about my story. And it's difficult to say, well, my story was a walk in the park. But we forget sometimes that what we experience is our own, and how we interpret that, it's no less or no more worse or painful than anyone else's story. And so for me, what I believe was very important for me, I had to make the decision to look at my pain, to face it, all of it. To face the trauma, the abuse, the physical, the emotional abuse, the volatility, all the judgments I experienced as a child, the disconnections, the isolation, all of that. And make a choice to look at that and not isolate it within myself, not numb out on alcohol or pornography or infidelity or pursuing money incessantly without caring or giving a fuck about anything else or anyone else. Like all the things that we do to distract ourselves from what we're truly feeling. And I did that for so many years. And so when I came to a point where I couldn't handle that anymore, because the distractions, I needed more of them. And enough was never enough.
Enough was never enough.
It was just more and more and more. And so the facade of that, the masks, it just got so tiring. And it got to a point where telling the truth and being very honest with myself and with others was far easier, although it was very painful coming face to face with all that, was far easier than continuing to live a lie and pretending that everything was okay when really it wasn't. And so that was a big part of my journey is the acceptance of who I really was, and I began to embrace myself as a whole person and started to look at myself as, here are some of my great qualities that I deeply admire, and here are the qualities in me that I don't admire, and I've been running from for 20, 30 years. And so how can I look at my life very differently now to incorporate all of that so I can actually choose consciously with awareness who I want to be in the world? And that was ultimately the intensity of that, Julian, was years of work, years of attention to that, deep attention. And the practice is constant. Now, I had a question today around, if we make a massive transformation in our lives, can we still go back to who we were, that negative or unhealthy or toxic self? And my response was immediately, yes, we can. We can fall back into that pattern, even if we don't want to, because if we're pushed to our edge and we haven't developed the coping strategies, the healthy coping strategies, we don't have a deeper sense of self, we'll revert back to what is familiar and what we know and what's easy. And so it's not a constant or daily battle, but it is an awareness. It is a daily awareness of who do I choose to be every day.
100%, because that's where the freedom comes in, right? I feel like you went back all the way to another generation before us, which is our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents. And so if you look at it, it's in our DNA. Our DNA is coming from like we're somewhat a rather primitive species as humans. And so our forefathers quite literally went through so much adversity and so much competition to the death, unfortunately, right? And so we're like the first ones in a long time who kind of have the privilege to lift up our heads into the conscious realms of exploring who we are. And I like what you're saying, because you're saying if you don't practice every day, though, it will just kind of go back to what the DNA binds you to.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be deliberate. And that was the thing for me. I wasn't deliberate. I was very scattered and fractured as an individual. And so I wasn't clear on what I wanted. And so I would just default, in terms of my actions, I would just default to what was easy. And what was easy for me was behaving out of integrity, was being dishonest, was living in lies, was not being a healthy human being, not being a healthy man in the world. That was just easy because I used that as masks to cover up my insecurities or to cover up my fears and my pains. And so it was also not only easy and convenient, it was also, to some extent, nurturing and life-saving. It was the ego's way of protecting self. And so we have to go into that deliberately to begin to shift it. Otherwise, it's always going to be that way, which is living a life that we don't really want to live, that we're not really connected to, but we're doing it out of habits that we formed as a child that was once a protective coping mechanism, a psychological, emotional coping mechanism. But right now as an adult, it doesn't serve us.
100%. I use the word freedom deliberately here because I've heard you talk about freedom and discipline quite a few times, where you kind of explain how discipline or self-love, even equaling discipline in that sense, right? Like, is your pathway to freedom.
Yeah, for sure. And discipline is one characteristic. Discipline is one virtue specifically for men, for everyone, of course, that we can apply. And it's that discipline is consistency. So when we're consistent in who we are and how we show up in our behaviors and our thoughts and our frameworks and our models of reality and our belief systems and how we do what we do every day, when we're consistent in that and we're deliberate, it's thoughtful action, it becomes more meaningful. We feel fulfilled in life. Whereas I remember in my days where I was just going on repeat and not really thinking about, why am I behaving this way? Why am I actually doing this? Is this really normal? Like, is it normal to be unfaithful consistently in a relationship? Is it normal to have these cycles of making a lot of money in a month and then for 3 or 4 months making no money? Like, is that really normal? But for me, I would blame everyone else. Oh, maybe it's the market. Oh, this is just what men do. Industry and business isn't good at the moment. The economy is failing. I don't have the skills right now, or I don't have enough money or capital behind me to invest in the business structures that I want. And when I do, then it will all be okay. And I wasn't taking responsibility for me. And that was a learned behavior. I witnessed that helplessness, victim mentality, and that diffusing of responsibility in my father, my primary masculine role model. So I just behaved that way for so many years without giving it any thought.
It's very insightful the way you share into, literally adversity and struggles, and also just really would be, without labeling it too negatively, but just like label negative behavior or poor behavior, right? Because it's it's poor because it will never end in that sense. I feel like the ego's behavior, when I look at my own egoic tendencies, when they show up, there is never enough, as you said. There's not enough money, not enough fun, not enough sex, not enough women, all of that. The moment you start acting from ego, there's just not enough. Your ego is always like, what about this? And what about that? And so really bringing it, kind of going from the consciousness of a boy into the consciousness of a truly conscious man. That's the journey, right? And that's what we're here for. And I think that's why I'm having you on today, because I feel like you're such a strong reflection of experiencing both, having experienced the downside and maybe haven't gotten it out of your system to really understand, no, that's actually how this works, overcoming those addictions, and now giving people the tools, the techniques, the confidence, and also the vulnerability to face all this,
Yeah, that's a big part of it, bro. I think you hit it really sharply there with the vulnerability piece. I think the seminal work of Brene Brown has changed the cultural landscape around that word vulnerability, and that's a great thing. And we can't have vulnerability without directly experiencing in parallel courage. And courage is a character trait that we all value in any and every human being. And I think to be very real and very raw and open with what we're feeling and experiencing, and to be able to go down that path and take ownership, deliberate ownership of that, and be disciplined to continue to self-reflect and be deeper aware of who we are, is courageous on many, many levels. And I think beyond that as well, we have an opportunity to see ourselves in a way that we've never seen ourselves before. And that's something that I value deeply. And I'm curious, man. You mentioned it earlier around, you mentioned something around exploration and how so many of our ancestors have really died quite violently because we lived in such a harsh environment, physical environment. Surviving on a day-to-day basis was so difficult. Now we live in such an easy world. We have space to think about these things, to contemplate. In the Renaissance period and also ancient Greece and ancient Egypt even brought this practice of philosophizing in deeper. But now more than ever, we're so blessed that we can have space for so many of us in the Western world particularly. We have space to just think about life and think about our actions and contemplate deeper. What does it mean to be human, as one of many questions, of course. Who am I? Who really, truly am I in the world?
Totally. Why are we doing the thing we're doing as a society at large, right? Because a lot of these cycles, they're just self-perpetuating because we never had the time to actually kind of look beyond the horizon and realize, oh, wow, this game between nations about territory, this could go on forever and ever. And it's just neither sustainable nor beautiful nor really honoring the soul of one, where we realize you're my actual brother, right? So I think as we are arising in this shift of consciousness, we're also, if it goes for me personally, I'll be the first one, we need to acknowledge the privilege we have, right? Because this world is still in a massive inequality at this point. And so there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. And this is part of why this podcast exists, is to, over the long run, no matter how long it takes, create a form of a holistic vision that actually kind of mentions or creates a form of a resolution that can be signed either by nations or the geopolitical people in power, to understand, hey, we're actually going this direction as a shared humanity. And right now we have the SDGs as like a cleanup plan, a to-do list, right, to kind of fix global warming, which I think is amazing and needs to be done. And then what, right? And in order for that, I think we truly get to clean up ourselves on the inside, and then from a conscious path actually embody as much as we can day by day, kind of overcoming even the occult control systems and the governmental powers and the geopolitical powers that are currently at play, because there's lots of that going on without falling into conspiracy theories. That is certainly not, it's not interested in the world being in a more equal place. And yet at the same time, there's lots of people that are,
and that's, I don't think that's a conspiracy theory. It's a product, it's a simple byproduct and an effect of the socioeconomic models that we're living by, and how they've perpetuated over time, how they've expanded and developed over time. And the truth of it is, any meaningful transformation at a large collective level is going to require a top-down approach where leaders of the world or leaders of a country or leaders of an area are coming together and recognizing that transformation is required. And equally to that, in parallel, a grassroots approach is taking place where every individual is assuming responsibility and empowered ownership of self and the choices that they're making. Now, you can have one or the other, but the impact and the transformation is firstly not going to be as deep, and secondly not going to be as fast. And so there is this collaboration. It's not about us and them. It's the people versus the leaders of the world. We're not separate. We're all connected. There's no walls that separate. There's no massive walls that separate wind coming in from the north to the south, or sea currents moving from one ocean to the next. I mean, we don't have that level of segregation. We're all interconnected in an intricate web of life, more than we think and know. But if we don't own that, and as individuals, we don't get ourselves, because here's a thing that I've learned in my life. When we're wounded, when we come and live from pain and fear, we're in survival mode. Mm-hmm. Physiologically, we're running a program where our hormonal profile is not healthy. We're releasing more stress hormones than ever. There's nothing wrong with stress. Stress is healthy. We need stress. It helps us survive. But to be in a constant low-level state or mid-level state of stress consistently, that's not healthy. And so that impacts, our physiology impacts our mental constructs and our models of reality, and it automatically places us in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you're narrow-viewed, you're hyper-selfish, you're more concerned about how can I just be okay with where I'm at, as opposed to coming up with solutions for humanity or for your family or for community or whatever it may be.
Yeah, because those solutions are all connected to a beyond your individual existence kind of way of thinking, right? That's the native way of looking at the earth of 7 generations into the past and into the future. And that's why I find it so curious how you mentioned generations before us, because we're coming out of a time window of deep suffering on this planet. So I think the time we're experiencing right now with so much contrast and a technological revolution that none of us can control even now anymore, I feel like it's just natural that so many of us are like, okay, head down. I can't even imagine.
It's too overwhelming. Because I mean, I was having a conversation about 3 days ago with a friend of mine around artificial intelligence, and where is that actually going, and how are we going to cope with the runaway expression of artificial intelligence if that happens? We're literally talking about a Terminator 2 scenario, and it's not that difficult to comprehend that. This isn't a conspiracy theory, or this isn't a far-fetched science fiction theory. This is very real. It's one of many possibilities that we're playing with fire in many respects as a humanity. And I'm not saying technology is bad. Technology is amazing. But if we aren't, do you know Ken Wilber? Are you familiar with Ken Wilber? Yeah. So Ken Wilber gives a beautiful analogy, and he speaks to the 6 or 7 stages of awareness or consciousness. And so I'll give the short story of it. And there's various expressions in life. So there's technology, there's culture, there's relationships, there's health, vitality, etc., spirituality. So if our technology is at a maybe level 5 or level 6 consciousness, yet our emotional sovereignty, our ability to relate healthily, our mindset and mind state is at a level 2. He's basically saying it's like a toddler wielding a loaded gun. That's a problem. And so if our consciousness, if our self-awareness, our emotional intelligence, the way that we relate to ourselves, the health of our nature, if that's not in integrity, and we're playing with technology, we're playing with tools, culture, socioeconomic tools, sociocultural tools, geopolitical tools that are more advanced than our ability to emotionally cope with that, oh, that's a recipe for danger and disaster. And it's evident in what's happening in the world now.
100%. I like how you're paraphrasing that, because I guess the only logical consequence in a conscious context is we have to evolve our consciousness. We have to continue to practice. We have to continue to help each other in our practice rather than, and don't get me wrong, I love when someone is sharp and can help me by calling out what I'm doing wrong. But rather than calling out what everyone else is doing wrong, it's about collaborating to reach a higher level of emotional sensitivity, emotional intelligence, and also, of course, intellectual intelligence and just pure state of awareness. But I really find in this time we're in, part of a strong conscious masculine is to have and create equal space for a strong and conscious feminine. Both within myself as well as within my partner, as well as within my friends, and then therefore the community and the world I walk through. And as you know, like there's a good community of people who's working on that, and then there's also a lot of work still to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you said. For me, when you say that, I just think to myself, instead of each individual coming from a lopsided perception and perspective of reality, we're just coming from a more balanced place. So when we're talking about masculine, feminine, expressive energies within that reside within every human being, within every sentient being, we're just speaking to finding a balance in how we communicate and express. And if you're a man, to be in your healthy masculine and to take ownership of that is empowering. And as a woman, to be in your healthy feminine, that's also empowering. And so there is a crossover between biology and culture and emotional and relational expression. And it's about finding that balance. And it's not about being extreme in one way or the other. And we find that whenever we're extreme in life, we're out of homeostasis and we're in a constant state of stress. And so every living organism, I'm looking outside now to my right, I'm looking at, I'm sort of not surrounded by forests, but I'm surrounded by greenery. It's really beautiful. Every single plant here at some level is striving for homeostasis. And when it's not, it does everything it can to get back into that place. If we're too much in our masculine, or if we're too much in our feminine, we're out of whack and out of balance. And so we're going to compensate with various behaviors. And more often than not, it's not super healthy.
And of course, that goes without saying at this point in time. That goes for anyone, no matter which gender we identify with.
Correct.
Or no matter which constellation of our sexual expression we have. Like, this is
Correct.
just an expression on the spectrum, but all of us have this experience on the inside. I love that you mentioned the plant world, because when I look at plants, one of the things that actually meditation as well as conscious exploration of psychedelica has kind of helped me with is to understand beyond the mind, but to feel that the plants are all truly connected. The trees are all truly connected through mycelium of mushroom, as well as through the root and earth kind of web, right? Do you have a story about conscious use of psychedelica? Is it something you can talk about, like an experience that you can highlight?
Yeah. But I mean, there was a phase there a couple of years ago where I went deep into DMT, and I was regularly taking DMT, and so it was my
or DMT from acacia.
Not from acacia. So I've done 5-MeO as well, which was remarkable. That was a very deep experience. Actually, I should probably speak to that as well, but I'll speak to both. So DMT from acacia, and it was it was from a local. So this was in Australia when I was in Australia, and the acacia plant there grows wildly all over. So I had a gentleman that was making it in the most natural way he possibly could. He was meditating with the plant. He was blessing the plant. It was a deep spiritual practice around this. I was very blessed to make contact with this man. And so my friend and I, who I'm very, very close with, who's a brother on so many levels, we would regularly be going into these journeys and really ceremonially setting it up. And in my home at that time, it was so beautiful. It's my family home. We still have that home. And I purposely had set the lounge room up. It was quite a big space, and set that lounge room up just to be a space of receiving, but also giving, an access point. And I remember regularly, sometimes weekly, going into these journeys and wanting the desire or the intention was exploration and openness to exploration, and to be very open to receiving whatever message, whatever intuition, instruction, insight, whatever it was, to be very open and to not judge that insight. That was the practice, essentially, not to judge or try and overthink the insights that I was receiving and I was experiencing on these journeys. And that was a new practice for me, because again, I was very accustomed to judgment, very accustomed to reason, very accustomed to having to overthink what I was experiencing. And so that taught me more how to receive and how to surrender and still hold myself in that. So the receiving element, the feminine element, and the holding of that container, the masculine element. So I was practicing both, and that was a beautiful experience. Yeah. And the 5-MeO, yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. The 5-MeO, I've only done once, and would like to go back there. Very powerful medicine. Very powerful medicine. And I was in that experience for probably 90 minutes or so. I was deep in it, man. It was amazing. And for me, the way I explain it is that the DMT from the Akasha, it's like you can touch God and see God, whereas the 5-MeO, I realized Godhead. I realized I was God, you are God, we are God, everything is God. And whether it's, you want to use another term such as the fully self-realized, or the fully realized self, or another term, whatever it may be, you are the unified cosmos. It was an experience of, I mean, I just basically cried for 90 minutes, literally just tears of awe and inspiration, but at the deepest levels. And you know, the interesting thing is, brother, I've experienced very similar experiences before, from practices of gratitude and through breath practice alone. So without any other substances besides breath, and even just the internal state of moving through gratitude and being connected to nature, being in nature. I've had very similar experiences to that before. Not quite as intense, but not that far off. So that interests me with what the human organism can do when we're in integrity and alignment with ourselves, and our focus is on a particular area of existence.
Powerful, right? When we bring attention and intention and breath together, that similar states are possible. Thank you so much for going into the topic of plant medicines and psychedelica. I think it deserves that we speak about it in a conscious manner, so that the culture around it can slightly shift.
Yes.
Ever so more. I have a follow-up question to that topic, and I feel like you already touched about it a bit. What I want to feel from you is, like, what is required for you to experience trust?
It's a really deep question, man. It's a really powerful question. For me, brother, if I don't trust myself, I project that mistrust onto others. And I find it very, very difficult to experience trust in others and trust in my environment when I'm not connected to myself at that deep level. And it makes me very sad. Very sad. I literally feel the sadness in my being.
Beautiful answer. I definitely felt that. There's a resonance, right? And when we believe with others, there's like an agreement that isn't like a yes or yeah that comes from our cerebral head brain, but it comes from the deep gut. Exactly. It's this like breathing out and that's a feeling of understanding one's belief. I resonate there strongly. I feel like trust is one of the biggest topics in our society at a large, between individuals, between countries, between faith groups. That's why I love to explore this question. Let me shift it and change it up a little bit. I have some rapid fire questions prepared. And then I have 2 more questions for you before we wrap up.
Please.
Okay. So ocean water or lake water? What do you prefer?
Oh, ocean water all day, every day.
Meat or veggies?
Vegetables if I had to choose.
Water or kombucha?
Oh, that sucks, man. That's a really hard question. Water.
If you want something done right, do it yourself or better as a team?
The immediate answer that comes to me is it really depends on the situation, and if I had to choose, better as a team.
I know they're not easy, because they're always like, oh, well, maybe both. Cannabis or alcohol?
Cannabis, easy.
Jungle or desert?
Jungle all day.
Steph, what is happiness to you?
For me, happiness is when I'm clear on my vision and I act in congruency with that vision, and that I feel meaning in my life. I experience fulfillment and meaning, and that lays the foundation for experiential happiness.
Yeah, let's let that resonate. I like that. Yeah. And then my question that actually started the podcast, which is, we touched on it a little earlier. What if we were to go and zoom out a little bit and say there's 7 generations into the future, which is roughly about 210 years. So if we had a vision for humanity, right? It could be a written vision. It could be just a feeling place. It can be detailed. It doesn't have to be. But if there is a vision, like an Earth vision, and we zoom out 200 years, how would you describe your piece of it? Like, what is your holistic vision for planet Earth?
You know, I've been thinking about this for probably 20 to 25 years. I really have, since I was a young child. The one word to describe my vision is unification. And the analytical part of me, the prefrontal cortex kicking in, knows that that's a massive, massive challenge that humanity is facing, is unifying the difference and unifying our ideas and unifying our cultures and religions and spiritualities and thoughts and ideals and values and all of that. And also the brain reconcile. We have to purposely up-level ourselves. And that, we're going to go back to artificial intelligence for a moment. Maybe the only way we're going to be able to do that is through artificial intelligence. And what I mean by that is, like, we're at a point in our existence now that our brain can't fathom 8 billion people and being intimate and unified with 8 billion people. Like, our brain can literally, physically not handle that. So we have to have this organism up-leveling, not only this spiritual, cognitive or psychological up-leveling, but there's an up-leveling in so many ways. Unification is where it's at, and inclusivity. And that doesn't mean that we don't experience exclusivity, but how we experience it is changing dramatically. As opposed to, oh, there's an exclusion, there's a separation, let's go to war, let's fight, let's dominate. Instead of that, let's go back a little bit and say, okay, there's an exclusion, there's a difference here. What does it mean? How can we all benefit from it? And it's a complete reframe of how we've done business. Not just business doesn't mean economics. I'm talking about businesses in the business of being human. How we've done everything needs to shift dramatically. And I don't know if I have the detailed answer. I'm working on it. I don't know many other people like Peter Joseph, Jacques Fresco, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Marx, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and so many more people. I mean, even Donald Trump in his own way, he has a vision for the future, whether it's aligned with what you and I may, and I say you and I because I think we share a very similar, I feel that we share a very similar vision. Is it aligned with ours? Maybe not, but most people that are thinking about the world ahead have a vision, and it's about creating a cohesion in that vision and how we do that. And I don't know completely yet, brother. That's something that I'm still very much thinking about and feeling into.
Well, thanks for giving it a shot and to verbalize some of that territory, because, there's another piece of even just going into the territory of answering this question is there is no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
And it's something you mentioned it, our head brain isn't really used to be exposed in the territory of there is no right or wrong. Actually, our head brain only knows yes, no, right, wrong, right? So thank you so much for sharing that. I very much resonate with this one simple word of unification. And there's a very complex kind of cause and effect that comes with it. And I think, I know for myself, I would not want to claim or pretend that I know the full cause and effect of the universe. So one step at a time, I'm here to experience it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, brother. For sure.
Steph, is there anything you'd want to share? You want to shout out, or you want to call to action people into checking some of your workout, or this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. Look, you can check me out. You can find me on stefanosstefandos.com. And I have some amazing programs for men and women commencing in middle of October. And so I'm very excited about those programs. And you're more than welcome to have a look at the website there. One of them is for men. It's called Reclaim Your Kingdom. And the other is for women. It's called Be the Queen. And with that, I'm very blessed to be running that program with my, she will be my wife at that point, my fiance now, but my wife. And we're running that program together, really just helping ladies find themselves at deeper levels and attract a king into their lives that they know they deserve as well. So it's really for single ladies, that particular program. And more importantly, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Stefanos Stefandos. There's a lot of information I put out there in terms of asking questions, getting a global discussion happening, thought-provoking material. I put a lot out there, and I purposely do that. I give a lot and give a lot and give a lot. And honestly, when I'm giving so much, I receive a lot. It forces me and it asks of me to think of life in a very different way. And so there's lots of information you can find out there on the social media channels.
Really cool. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate being here.